Alrighty, let's get this train wreck started. Or shortly to get started. I mean, we'll see what happens here. Choof. Okay, it looks like I'm actually broadcasting. Though it's weird. I can't get used to the whole delay thing here. That is fine. I assume chat will tell me how the audio balance is and all of that stuff. So, yeah, if anything's wrong, just let me know in the chat. I am sort of watching. But I realize my camera's there. Camera 1. So, and that should be about where I'm going to be looking. I don't know. I don't even think the camera's necessary. I don't know what's going on here. This is all going to be a train wreck. But, this is a very bizarre, random idea I had. Because, I don't know, let's get something started here. What do I want to do tonight? So, the thing is, I like to just sounds Gino. Gino is having, r/I had a stroke there. Gino is having trouble typing the word sounds. Hello, Gino. Hello, Fneer. Hello, October. Oh, hi. And hello, Procelus. There you go, Gino. Got it in 3. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Let's see. What should we do? So, I mean, this whole thing, this is going to be... Let's find something fun to do. Because this is the thing, is I got to remember that I'm on camera and not touch my face. I got to at least remember not to pick my nose. I can touch my face, I can't pick my nose. So, okay, yeah, we'll just go right for this. Okay, so here's the deal. I like to talk role-playing gaming crap, and people like to hear my take on stuff. And I don't always find it worth it to type up an entire article worth of stuff. You know, like some things are just not worth typing 3,000 words about. Or 5,000 words, whatever I do now. And at the same time, like, sometimes just typing stuff out is a pain in the ass. So I thought it would be fun to just kind of do a live stream, but I hate doing the talking head thing, and I find that I am at my best talking-wise and thinking-wise when I'm playing old games that I have played 10,000 times before. So I thought, here's a crazy idea. I'm going to do a live stream, but instead of talking about a video game and analyzing the video game and picking it apart, I'm just going to mindlessly play the video game while at the same time I talk about just whatever random crap crosses my mind role-playing game-wise. And I'm not going to try and explain the game or what I'm doing or anything, because it's just there in the background for me to do something with my hands, and if you want to watch it, you can watch it. So the thing is, I want to start tonight with a topic that came up it's been a long time since I played this. Topic that came up over the weekend in the Angry Discord, which had to do with combat, and specifically the idea of damage racing and non-combat actions, and why didn't I pick that up? And why people game designers have trouble getting players to take non-combat or non-attack actions. And this is also sort of an experiment, because we're going to see if this kills my concentration to the degree where I can't talk about a topic. Because I'm too much concentrating on the game. And Zombies Ate My Neighbors may be the wrong game for this, because Zombies Ate My Neighbors is kind of a pain in the ass of a game to begin with. And sip. But I can always switch games, because this is just me hanging out and having retro game night while I chat. So, I think it was Diego, an angry aunt. Nope, Diego is a frenemy. if I remember correctly, in the Discord chat, who started a massive conversation about role-playing game combat, and it became like a whole 2-3 day conversation, and I missed most of it because it happened mostly over the weekend, I think, and I try to limit the hitboxes in this game are kind of a pain. Anyway, so I try to limit my contact with Discord on the weekends and just my contact with the internet in general. Friggin' zombie hiding behind a tree there. And so I missed out on the conversation until it had gone so far that I couldn't even figure out how it had started and what it was all about. Okay, but ultimately, I was able to get a little bit of a recap, and the recap indicated that the crux of the conversation was this. There are role-playing games out there that try to get players... I forgot which button does what. It's been a long time since I played this. That try to get players to do things in combat other than attacking, and other than casting spells. You know, it's actually specifically for non-spellcasters, I think was the point. So the idea is there are these games that try to get players to take actions other than just straight up attacking, particularly non-magical characters. And no matter what these games do, they never work. They never seem to get players to do anything other than attacking. And of course, the main thing that gets said for that, the main thing that gets said for that is that, well, combat, especially in D&D, is a damage race. So you can't expect players to do anything other than deal damage. Anything other than dealing damage is a wasted turn. Which is kind of fair, but it is also extremely reductionist. And I really wanted to address... Ah, shit, I forgot those burst into flames. Okay. It really is a bit reductionist. And I really want to talk about the idea of damage racing, and I want to talk about the idea of... Do I have any soda cans? Yes, I do. The biggest problem with this game is cycling through weapons. Takes forever. Anyway, so the whole idea of damage racing, and this goes back, like, even in the 4E days, we were talking about this, like, the only useful condition to put on an enemy was dead. And chat hasn't scrolled in a while, and that always makes me nervous that I'm not actually broadcasting, or people can't hear me, or they've all checked out, which honestly is fine, because I'm boring anyway. Okay, but the only good the only good condition to put on an enemy is dead. Like, everything else is kind of a waste. There's no point in buffing, there's no point in debuffing. If you're not dealing damage, you're not progressing the combat. And that is a fair assessment, but it is also rather an unfair criticism. Because really, that's how combat is supposed to work. Oh, Ezekiel in October just checked in to let me know that there's people listening. Thank you both. Okay, so let's talk first of all about this whole, like, non-attack actions. Because, especially when it comes to melee, okay, it is actually, completely understandable that players would not want to do anything other than attack, for the same reason that, and I mean, so let me put this argument in a different way, and then you'll see what, you'll see where it, what am I trying to say here? If I phrase this argument differently, you'll nod your head and be like, oh, actually that makes total sense. Because there was an argument when first, like when they were first deciding what to do with cantrips, especially, this also came about in 4th edition, actually, and it was, if you're a wizard, you don't want to do anything other than cast spells. Why should you ever do anything other than cast spells? You're a wizard. That's what you got into it for. So if it's combat, and you are a fighter, or a melee combatant, whatever you happen, why would you ever want to do anything other than attack anyway? Which makes perfect sense, right? And now suddenly it's like, okay, yeah, I guess we can't really fault the fighter for not wanting to use his battle axe or his sword, or, or fault the barbarian for, whoops, wrong button. Yeah, it's fine. So why would, you can't fault the fighter. Okay. But it still leads to this situation where you do get into these places where combat is just about trading blows back and forth. You get into these places where the battle lines have been drawn, and you have your fighter and the ogre, and they're just standing there whacking away at each other. Of course, nobody actually, no, that's not true. I was going to say nobody complains that the wizard is just, like flinging magic missiles, but then you consider the warlock is just throwing the same eldritch blast, and the wizard is just throwing the firebolt and what have you. And it all just becomes a matter of throwing attack after attack after attack. And this is seen as a negative thing. Now, it's fair to see that as a negative thing, because when you describe it that way, it does sound really awful. But then when you're actually at the game table, the amount of time that gets spent in the... We're now beyond the stages, I remember. So the amount of time that actually gets spent in that trading blows phase is usually just a round or two in most combats. Okay, the thing is, most combats last 3 to 5 rounds if you're doing it right. The bigger problem is that game masters actually try to make combats last a lot longer. I died. And the avatar is saying, I feel like D&D's combat kind of strains to do anything else. And honestly, I disagree with that, and that's sort of where I'm coming to. But I will also say that all tabletop role-playing games, at least the combat-oriented fantasy adventure role-playing games, struggle to do anything else, and that's for good reason. And I forgot a mystery potion. So you end up in these situations where, like you move around and you attack, and you move around and you attack, and you move around and you attack. But let's drop the value judgment for a minute. Let's say, oh, and that's a terrible way for combat to be. Okay, and let's also pretend that we don't have, like, specifically in D&D now, we don't have the fighter doing combat maneuvers and imposing disadvantage when the enemy attacks an adjacent ally or whatever, combat mastery he has, and that the rogue isn't getting into position to sneak attack and then dealing sneak attacks and doing things like that. Because you do have to ignore all of those little things that happen throughout the combat from one turn to the next to say, well, it's just about trading blows. Okay. And even then, you watch your wizards and your warlocks, and they generally open with different spells, and then after the first round or two, they settle into a round or two of flinging firebolts or eldritch blasts, and then everything settles down again. Okay. But let's put all of that value judgment aside and say, oh, well, that's just a terrible way for combat to be designed. Like, when you really think about it, what the hell do you expect people to do in combat? Okay, like, if you have a fighter, if you have a fighter, or you have a combat wizard, and there's a fight that broke out, I stopped because I was looking at the chat to see what Fanir was saying. What do you expect them to do? It's a fight from beginning to end. I mean, imagine a firefight here. Like, you know, like on the battlefield, there's soldiers on either side. What do? They run up, they get into position, and then they start basically firing at each other. They advance they occasionally advance when it's safe to advance. And they try to take the position, but for the most part, it's just move and attack, move and attack, move and attack. That's how fighting is going to be. Trying to make it something different is ludicrous on the face of it, because, you know, I'm not going to spend time once the deadly weapons have come out. Okay, I'm not actually going to spend a whole lot of time like intimidating and buffing or whatever. Like once the fight is close enough that we're basically trading blows, you know, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on anything that isn't eliminating the threat that's right in front of me. That just makes perfect sense. So the real failure here is not that that's the way combat plays out, but in fact, in making that interesting to play out. D&D 5e, which is not something I say very often, but to be fair to D&D 5e for a moment, I actually think D&D 5e does make that pretty interesting. Okay? Until you get to the really high levels and the hit point, I do think the hit points on enemies go up a little bit too fast. But until you get to the really high levels and combat really is just, you know, a few rounds. And there's another side to this, but I guess I should just get diverted and say the other side to this. I am also going to say that dungeon masters have a problem when they create their own combats, and even adventure writers have a problem when they create their combats, because he wasn't dead and I just walked right into him. And I cannot remember where the last neighbor is in this level, and I only have one hit point left, so I should use one of my many health packs. That there is a tendency among game masters and adventure designers to shy away from combats that only last a few rounds. Okay, you will find that a lot of people, when they're making combats, they're like, oh, to make this interesting, I need to do crazy shit with the terrain, and I need to drop a variety of different monsters, and I need to do this, and I need to do that. So then we create these very, very complicated combats because we're trying to make them more complicated, and we're trying to make them dynamic, and we're trying to make them more interesting. And then more often than not, they overstay their welcome. But again, I don't think that if you actually look at this from the player's perspective, most players are actually saying, yeah, these fights are really just starting to get dull. It happens. Shit. I forgot this was the level with the werewolves. Do I have any silverware? Yeah, okay. Because werewolves are weak against silverware. Logically. This is the level where the game is like, you know what? Screw you. We're just going to take neighbors away from you. Because they just turn into werewolves before you can get anywhere near them. And then you lose them forever. Anyway, sorry, but apart from the game. Okay. So, I think D&D does make the trading of blows fairly interesting for a few rounds. And when you consider that you're going to have 3 to 5 round combats, and you're going to have, what, maybe 3 or 4 combats in a session. Though most people don't do that because most people can't keep combat running very fast, which is another problem. Like, there's another place where it starts, where the strain and the boredom of combat starts to show, is that a lot of people struggle to keep combat running at a good pace. And so that just contributes to the boredom where people end up waiting 10 minutes, that's an exaggeration, for their turn, and then they spend their whole turn just casting Eldritch Blast again. There's not a secret passage there. So I can kind of understand that argument, but that comes down to you're not running your combats very well. Now, we can argue that that's an issue that's inherent to D&D and Pathfinder and all the other ones, and I won't even counter that so much. Like, yeah, that's true. They've gotten to the point. The games have gotten to the point now where it takes too long. The problem is the player turns take too long to resolve. And the reason, I'm just going to stand here and keep taking damage. Why don't I do that? That's smart. Player turns take too long to resolve, but the problem is, I hate these tight spaces, you get hung up. The problem is that, number one, the rules minutia for individual character abilities, like spells or, combat mastery options or what have you, all of the rules minutia for that, it becomes time-consuming to resolve those actions, and players have to have cards and look this shit up in the book and all of that stuff. And then on top of that, then there's always the, okay, how does that spell work? The GM has to ask about it, and then you resolve it, you roll dice, and then there's, reactions and interrupts and things like that. And yeah, all of that shit does bog down the combat. And it really comes down to just the complexity on the character sheet, and the complexity of individual actions is what's doing it. Which ironically becomes an issue. I have to wait for the monster thing to run out so that I can open this stuff, because if you punch it open, it destroys what's inside. So the solution to the whole combat gets boring problem is to give the players more actions and more mechanical abilities, and to spell out more different actions they can take in the rules, which actually only compounds the problem of making combat take longer, where if combat flowed fast, the trading of blows that combat... See, I lost 3 neighbors there. Fuck this game. The trading of blows wouldn't be an issue, and this is where the game ends. I don't know, did I pick up enough Pandora's boxes? Okay. But man, I am getting really off track. Okay. Here's my Pandora's boxes. Okay. Let me try to bring this back on track here. It is tough. It is tough to ramble about things and play a video game that requires some concentration. So, let's get back to the whole idea of, well, what the hell do you expect people to do anyway? Combat is about trading blows, right? It's kill or be killed. That's what a combat is. You have decided now that the only way to resolve your differences is to kill the thing standing in front of you, and the thing standing in front of you has made the same decision, or else it has, or because you're threatening it, has decided that you have to die because that's the only way that it can save its life. And by the way, nothing changes if we say, oh, well, you can add morale, and then monsters will run away before they're dead, because even then, it's still the same end result. Instead of just fighting them to be dead, you're fighting until they run away. And they're fighting you until you're dead, because you won't run away, because you're players, and players don't run away. So it is going to be the case that you're going to be trading blows. That's what combat is. And on top of that, if you're a fighter or a barbarian or a rogue or basically anyone who isn't a spellcaster... Ah, shit. you're gonna want to just be making attacks. That's your thing. So the goal needs to be to make that type of combat, to make it fun to trade blows. Okay, the solution is not you need to make combat more dynamic, or you need to add more non-combat actions, or you need to add more different options. More different options is how you got into this problem of combat is boring to begin with. Okay, so the solution is to make it interesting to trade blows. How do you do that, though? Because, like, really, it's going to come down to pick the attack you want to make the attack. Okay. Now, there are examples of games that actually manage to make things interesting. I'm going to go back to the example I always bring up, and, if you're playing the Angry Drinking Game, you can take a shot right now, because I'm going to mention, again, the Soulsborne games. Specific, like, the first, like, Demon Souls and Dark Souls were revolutionary. Demon Souls kind of got overlooked because it came out at the wrong time, and it didn't quite get it didn't catch on the way Dark Souls did. But I also think that Demon Souls is a little bit weaker than Dark Souls when you get down to it. But anyway, that game did manage to do what was previously somewhat impossible, and that was to make melee combat fun and interesting. And the way it did it, which is kind of similar to the way like things like God of War did it, and other games that rely on spectacle combat, though Dark Souls and Demon Souls are not spectacle combat games. But the way it did it was, first of all, obviously you had every time you made a melee attack, you had some different options for making that melee attack, right? Like you could make a light attack or a heavy attack is the most simple thing, right? So every time you made an attack, you had to make a choice, and the choice changed depending on the situation. You didn't want to make a heavy attack when the enemy was, when the enemy wasn't off balanced, when the enemy was free to act, because the enemy would make a quick attack and just interrupt your. I think we're just going to monster potion this here. So the enemy would just, make a quick attack, interrupt your attack, and then you would lose your attack because it got interrupted. But then too, and this was more specific to the Soulsborne games and not so much the other like Dark Souls, or not like God of War and those sorts of fighting games. There was also the other side, which was defense. You could also raise your shield or hold your shield up or dodge roll, right? And so, obviously the solution is active defenses. You need to let the players actively defend themselves so that now when it's not their turn, they also get to make a choice. But that is not the solution either. And the reason that's not the solution is because we're already talking about a combat that gets too bogged down and drags on so long that the game starts to feel boring. That's really what the first problem. So, yeah, I'll just take the hit. I don't even care. I hate this level. This level's like a maze. Well, that makes it easier. If I lose my neighbors, then... Oh, that was a random potion. Okay, well, I lucked out. So then there's the defense thing, right? You can hold up your shield, or you can dodge roll, or whatever. But then you get tricked into thinking that the solution is just have active defenses. And that is not the solution, because you don't want to add more out-of-turn actions, and you don't want to just add another choice that doesn't affect the main choice. Right? So, yeah, this level is not amazing. I get to, like, in this game, I get to about level 20. I pretty much, I get to the graboids, and that's about my limit. And even then, I'm not doing well because I'm face tanking pretty much everything, and also trying to think about role-playing games. And this experiment might have to be considered a failure. But anyway. Okay. Gino is asking, am I hinting at the lack of in-game content consequences for slow play? No, but there should be. Like, I won't say there should be in-game consequences for slow play. I think the game needs to be designed, first of all, for quick play. Okay, and second, that game masters need to understand that it is their job to make play happen quickly, so that they need to maintain a shot clock. You know, it could, but that said, you can write that into the rules. Like, you can say that I wouldn't suggest this as a rule, but you could say in the rule book that players must take their actions within a certain amount of time or lose their turn. And then the game master has to enforce that. But then most people are just not going to enforce that anyway. So that's going to be the problem. What I'm suggesting instead is that, okay. Really the thing you have to do is figure out how to make melee combat... Oh, the level started. Figure out how to make melee combat involve more than just making an attack roll. That's the solution. Okay? And the trick is looking at why referring to the game as a damage race is fallacious. Okay, because people say, oh, it's just a damage race. It's just whichever gets to 0 hit points faster. Whoever gets 0 hit points faster is the loser. Okay. Alright, you know what? This ain't working. Where's my OBS? Okay. Alright. That's it. This whole video game thing just isn't working. This has become a live stream where I'm talking about combat. Okay. Because it's just taking too damn much mental focus. And let me just shrink this down a little bit, stick it over to the side. All right. In combat, you have 2 goals, not 1. And when you refer to something as a damage race, you're referring to only 1 goal. Whoever is first across the finish line wins. Involves 2 goals. 1 is defeat, whatever that means, defeat your opponents. The other is survive. Okay. I'm eating my cherries now. Because I'm also not doing the silver entirely. Okay. Now, D&D and pretty much every fantasy adventure game, gives you lots of tools to defeat your opponents. Okay? You have a whole lot of actions that you can choose to fight your opponent with. Okay? You can make different kinds of attacks, yada, 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 whatever. Okay? What you don't have a lot of tools for is surviving. Apart from the healing crap, which healing is, by the way, the worst. There should be no in-combat healing, which I know sounds crazy, but there should be no in-combat healing. But that's a whole other argument for another night. Okay. You do not have a lot of tools to keep yourself alive. You don't have a lot of tools for survival. Okay, now when you go back to the firefight analogy and you think about soldiers on the battlefield trying to take a position, okay, they are constantly balancing out two needs. The need to not get shot and the need to take the opponent's position, take the enemy position, right? That is why the first thing they do is they run into cover. But how do they choose cover? They choose cover that protects them from the enemy, but also allows them to attack the enemy. There could, like, if they really wanted to survive, they could hide behind a wall. But you can't shoot through a wall and take out your opponent, so that's not good cover. If you really want to shoot your enemy, you could just stand out in the open and that's not going to work either, because then you're going to get shot. So you are constantly playing this balancing act between surviving and killing the enemy. Okay. The problem is, in order for that to work in a game, you need to constantly be changing your resources. Because first of all, in Melee, the whole concept of cover just doesn't work. Okay, in Melee, you're going to have two or more people standing there and just banging at each other and cover, apart from I'm standing there with a pillar and we use the pillar to defend ourselves kind of a thing. Apart from that, cover is not a thing in Melee combat. Okay? What Dark Souls did through the stamina meter was made you balance defense and attacking. If you stood there with your shield up the entire time, number one, if you stood there with your shield up the entire time, you would never get killed, but you would also never win. If you kept your shield down the whole time and you just whacked away, you would get killed because, no matter how much progress you made, the enemy would outdamage you and you would die. Okay, so you had to find this balance. Sometimes you had to have your shield up to defend yourself, doink, and then you would attack, and you would be constantly making this choice. Okay, then on top of that, there was the stamina gauge. So every time you were behind your shield and you took a hit, it was chewing up your stamina. You could not hide behind your shield indefinitely. If you did hide behind your shield for too long, eventually you would run out of stamina, your defense would break, and then you would be defenseless, and also you couldn't attack because you didn't have any stamina. Likewise, even if you could manage to swing away and swing away and swing away and swing away, you would eventually run out of stamina doing that, then you would be defenseless, you would have no resources for defense. Okay, so there was this need where you had to, at some point, like you couldn't hide behind your shield. At some point you had to make an attack because the shield would not protect you indefinitely. Or alternatively, you had to sometimes stop attacking even if you weren't afraid of getting killed because you would run out of stamina. Okay, so those three mechanics together, blocking, attacking, and the stamina gauge, already made every turn, because it was it was an analog game, it wasn't a turn-based game, it was a real-time game. So every turn involved you balancing these resources, and if you didn't balance them properly, you would die. Okay. The key, if you want to make combat interesting in tabletop role-playing games, is first and foremost to recognize the solution is not to add non-combat actions or to add non-attack actions. That is stupid. Nobody's going to take them because they're in this to attack. The key is also not to allow the players to attack and deal damage every turn to always make progress, and then let something else ride on those attacks, right? Like, there's some games where I'm trying to remember. I think, is Colville thinking about doing this, where every turn your attacks just hit you, like you're always cranking out damage, and then it's just what else do you do? And it's like, great, now all you've done is made the progress toward the kill goal also automatic. Okay, which is not the solution either. So you need the players to balance attacking and defending, which can include things like buffing and debuffing and all of that shit. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't have any non-attack actions. And in fact, as soon as you start to do this stuff, you'll have people using more non-attack actions. But here's the other thing you need to do. You need to make it so that if the players do nothing to defend themselves, they will die before the enemies do. And that is a point that sticks in everybody's craw. Okay? The simple fact of the matter is the math in Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder and all the games that are based on, perfectly balanced combat is to ensure that if all the players do is attack every turn, they will always win the damage race. And what you really need to do is design the game so that the players will lose the damage race if that's all they do. Then you need to figure out a way for them to trade resources between attack and defense so that they are forced to decide from one round to the next, am I attacking this round or am I defending this round? And then you can also say things like, well, I am the cleric, I will defend you this round to free you to attack. And then the cleric can make interesting decisions like, who should I free to attack this round? If all three of my allies are beaten down and I have a divine shield spell that can defend one of my allies this turn, who is it best that I give that to? Should I give it to the barbarian? Should I give it to the fighter? Should I give it to the rogue? What have you. Likewise, the fighter can draw attacks and focus on defense, and as long as the fighter draws attacks, his allies are free to use their rounds to attack and what have you. But then, once you have this basic idea of there has to be attacking and defending, and the players have to need to defend themselves once in a while, or else they will die, or get critically injured, or get scarred, or whatever the hell you want to do with it. Once you get past that point, then you can start to think about, shit, I just totally lost my thought. Okay, where was I? Okay, trading, the next thing you have to figure out now is how to communicate to the players what turns. Final Fantasy XIV is the best tabletop role-playing game. Final Fantasy XIV is a video game. Or are you referring, is the Final Fantasy role-playing game that was coming out or did come out, is that based on Final Fantasy XIV? Also, hello, Wes Belmont. Okay. So the next thing you have to figure out is how to give the players the information they need to decide when to attack and when to defend. Okay. Now, again, I'm going to go back to the Souls games. In the Souls games, you learn to read your opponents. You learn to watch when they're telegraphing. So you have situations where, oh, okay, the enemy has just finished attacking. He is out of breath for a moment. This is a good opening for me to attack. And then you have the enemy is winding up for the big attack. I need to defend myself. In other video games, you will see things like enemies making normal attacks, but then every so often they will start doing a thing, and then there will be an area on the battlefield that'll light up, and that'll say, oh, get out of this area because the enemy is going to do flame pillar or whatever. Okay, which, when you start looking for this now, when you start to realize that the key to a good combat system is designing so that the player has to pay attention to both goals, the stay alive and the deal damage, and the kill, the defeat the enemy goals. Okay, and that you have to swap back and forth between those, and you start to look at how different video games handle that, you start to see all the different solutions, and then you start to see how important things like telegraphing what the enemy is going to do becomes in these situations. Because if the players don't have information to decide when do I attack, when do I defend, they're just acting at random. And the key is so that they know how to respond. Because then you can get Wes Belmont is saying those aspects are all present in Final Fantasy XIV, which is what I was referring to. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying, is that when you start looking at video games with actual good combat that's fun to play, you'll start to see how you take a game like Cuphead. Okay. Cuphead is very interesting because Cuphead is all about one type of challenge. It's one type of goal, and it's just about perfecting that goal. If you hold down the fire button in Cuphead, because the enemies are so big and take up so much of the screen real estate, and because all your attacks basically have pretty big areas that they cover, even the little pea shooter, as long as you are holding down the attack button, you are constantly chipping away at your opponent. Okay? And so the only game you're really playing in Cuphead is learning how to avoid and basically how to respond defensively to the enemy's attacks. Okay? Now that's fine because it's really a single-minded sort of execution challenge. It is just, it's honestly 90% just zoning, right? But once you get into more complicated combat scenarios, you start to see that there is always this balance between two goals, the stay alive and the kill. And then and you are forced to make decisions between those two things, and the game communicates to you how to make that decision. Okay. So what might this look like? And then you can go even further with this and then start to build all sorts of mechanics around this, because again, this is just the core system. But really, that's where you see tabletop role-playing games. Fanir is saying in some action video games, enemies are not very reactive and they become damage spongy and the combat gets boring very fast. And that's exactly it, Once you know the pattern, then it's just a matter of letting the enemy soak up the combat, and there's not really anything interesting you can do. The other thing too is that if you get tanky enough in some video games, where you can just tank all the damage and then just keep wailing away on the enemies, then enemy just becomes clicking or combat just becomes clicking or pressing the same button over and over again, which is exactly the problem that we're trying to solve. Okay, but once you get past that initial, core mechanic, here's how you know that fantasy tabletop adventure role-playing games aren't doing it right, is because the core melee mechanic is make an attack roll. If you hit, you do damage. Okay, that's all you need to know to fight. Okay. If the core engine said something like, on your turn, decide whether you are in an attack stance or a defense stance, hypothetically. At the start of your turn, choose attack stance or defense stance. Okay, maybe you can even let people attack even when they're in the defense stance, but they just do chip damage. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Okay, but choose your attack stance or your defense stance, and then when you make an attack, choose between this and that. Choose light or heavy, right? And then roll your attack, and then deal damage, right? Right there already, you have a matrix of 4 different options that are core to every person swinging a melee weapon. This is not dependent on having a class that is melee or anything else. If you have a melee weapon in your hand, you can be in an attack or a defense stance, and you can make a light or a heavy attack. This is just one example. If that was the core mechanic, you already have a dynamic melee combat where it doesn't matter if the game comes down to 2 opponents trading blows in melee, because they still both have 2 different degrees of freedom with every blow they trade. They have to make 2 decisions just to trade blows. Okay. Then on top of that, you have equipment that can ride off of that. Like, if you are in a defensive stance, having a shield means more, right? If you're not in a defensive stance, your shield means less. Maybe certain weapons are better with heavy attacks, certain weapons are better at light attack. Yeah, all this sort of stuff that you can now build into this, but it's predicated on making a core melee resolution mechanic that is already interesting even before you choose your class. Okay, now you have to now tackle the other side. And that is, how do you now communicate information about what the opponent is doing to the players? And again, if monsters had to have a stance, and maybe like one of the things I've toyed with is the idea that monsters have a stance too, but they have to set the stance at the end of the round. Okay, whereas a player can choose their stance at the beginning of their turn, monsters always set their stance at the end of their round. So at the end of the monster's turn, they say, now the monster is in offensive stance or defensive stance or gathering power for a flame breath stance or whatever. Now everybody can see what the monster is gearing up to do, not necessarily specifically, but if the monster's in offensive stance, you might decide to go with a defensive stance to take the attack. Or if you're the sort of person you think the monster's going to make a heavy attack, and I don't know, you have some sort of interrupt system or knockback or stagger system, and you're going to go before the monster goes again, because you're always going to go before the monster. Okay. You always know you're going to go again before the monster goes. So if the monster is in an attack stance, you suspect that they're going to do a heavy attack, then if you have some sort of attack form that is a stunning attack or a staggering attack, you might decide to do that yourself. If you hit, you negate the enemy's next attack. If you don't hit, now you're defenseless. Or if you chose to defend, well, you're going to take that hit, but your defense might decrease it. Okay? And so you can see, just from a very simple set of mechanics that we've just talked about there, all of the sudden, trading blows, because that's all we're talking about now, is just banging away at each other, is suddenly interesting and dynamic. Okay? And that is the key to the real solution. Combat is a damage race. There's no way around that. The thing is, though, unlike a foot race, in a damage race, in the combat race, you're allowed to elbow your opponent, or, you know, try to drive their car off the road. Right? Like when you think about the things you could do in a, say, like a chariot race, yeah, you can just go as fast as you want for the finish line, or you can have those spinny saw blades on your wheels and try to knock the opponent off the road. You know, you can slow the opponent down so that they can't make as much progress as you. Suddenly then, it becomes worth it to think about defense. And then the character who can only do offense, the barbarians, say, the person who trades all their defensive power to just crank out as much offense as they can, they are extremely dangerous, but they're also a glass cannon. They're also vulnerable. You know, and likewise, the fighter who trades a lot of their offensive potential for defense, they have staying power, but they have a hard time killing the opponent, which means now the fighter needs the barbarian, and the barbarian needs the fighter, or the rogue needs the fighter, or the wizard needs the fighter, or the fighter needs the warlock. Okay, so now you make it impossible to make a character, well, not impossible, okay? You can have a character that balances offense and defense, and they're okay at both, or you can have a character that's great at one and terrible at the other, or you can have a character that's great at the other and terrible at the one. And then that demands synergy and working together. And it also means that occasionally there's going to be disasters on the battlefield where the barbarian needs to defend himself because no matter, as powerful as he is not going to take the dragon down in 3 shots. And the dragon is going to take him down in 1. And now that becomes a, well, shit, I need the cleric to buff me. Or, you know, I need the fighter to go in first, or whatever. Okay. But again, the real key here is not to say D&D combat is just a damage race, so it's always going to be this way. But instead, D&D combat is a damage race because that's what combat is. So how can I make a damage race fun? And that's pretty much my only thoughts that I had for that whole conversation, you know. Yeah, so I guess that's it. That's it. So we have learned a few things from this stream, apart from the mechanics. The one thing is the idea of having rambling video game streams, where I sit and play a video game and try and talk through a complicated role-playing game topic, not going to happen. But the idea of having reasonably regular live streams where I talk about random ideas and spitball things about gaming, probably could happen more often if people like that. Honestly, if you enjoyed this and you want me to do more shit like this, or, you know, like anything, because I'll talk about game prep, or I'll talk, you know, I'll answer questions, I'll do Ask Angries and stuff like this, but it's more sort of me just rambling through something, through a topic that I want to talk about. It's not as interactive as the live chats, but I'm still watching the chat. But if this sort of thing is fun for you, drop a comment on this video when the recording is up, because I'm not gonna. I've seen the chat, or let me know if you're on Discord. Just drop a comment there or whatever, and yeah, maybe I'll do more of this, because this is fun. This is a very low effort thing to do, is just sit around and talk about gaming, and I love doing it. So, and I'd be happy to ramble about more things. And I don't know if the visual aspect of having a camera on me actually helps. But meanwhile, before I sign off, if anybody has any questions that they want to ask me in the chat about what I've said, I'd be happy to hear that. And I also do want to do more video game streams too, because I do enjoy it. I have been meaning for a while to do a complete playthrough of Tunic, for the people who couldn't experience and enjoy it themselves. Perhaps if it was a video game with some dead time, like Zelda, when you walk between dungeons. The Zelda games I play, walking between dungeons is not dead time. Because it's mainly linked to the past. Yeah. I guess I could do like open world bullshit. Like I could do Breath of the Wild or like I could do Minecraft, right? Like you'll just building a house, and while I build my little house, let's talk about I don't know. Let's talk about my neat idea for focus mechanic, or whatever. Anyway, I don't know. Let's talk about why we need to remove death from tabletop role-playing games and what we could do instead. All right. So it was fun. It was a fun little hour-long hangout. I hope it was enjoyable. Yeah, JB is saying I would watch a Tunic playthrough. I really do want to do it. Tunic had some of the best moments for me. What can we do for our combats in our current fantasy adventure games? So, I mean, number one, if you're running D&D, you're kind of screwed anyway, but the first most important thing is to keep it moving faster. Okay, so, work on your pacing, keep the game moving faster, don't run beyond 12th level, especially in D&D. Telegraph. Okay, tell the players somehow what the monsters are planning to do. Okay, give them a sense of who the monster is planning to target, what they're planning to do. This is all advice I've already given out on my website. But telegraph, pacing, and maybe don't sweat it so much. Like, here's the other thing: if your players aren't complaining that your combats are boring, then they're not. Like, I know a lot of game masters, they sit there and watch the combat. It's like, oh my gosh, it's just become like banging away at each other for 3 rounds. And like the players don't care. Then you don't have a problem. Okay? It's really easy for game masters when they're sitting around talking online to decide things are problems that absolutely no one thinks is a problem. Okay, and to assume players are not having a good time because, well, the combat seemed boring. But also, here's the thing as a game master, make sure you're mixing in some easy fights. Make sure you're mixing in some fights that really do only last 3 rounds and are fairly straightforward. And that's because that's something that game masters feel like they can't do. Like, like if the players just like decimate foes in 3 rounds, like, oh, that wasn't even worth the challenge. It wasn't worth the experience points. You're actually supposed to do that. At least 25% of the fights should be easy, which means if you're running 4 or 5 combats a night, 1 or 2 of them should just be fairly straightforward stuff. You really, and you should only make your set piece encounters. You should only have 1 truly complicated encounter a night. So. Alright. Anyway, I think that's enough from me. Like I said, it was a good hour-long stream. If you want to hear more of this, let me know somehow, and I will do more streams like this, and we will not do it with the video game next time. I will just hang out and talk and have some notes, and it will basically be sort of a podcast stream, whatever. All right.